Hi, everyone. I'm Miguel Escobar, and I recently wrote the book, The Unjust Steward: Wealth, Poverty, and the Church Today. And it's a book that explores how Christianity transformed in its understanding of money, wealth, and poverty over the first 5 centuries, and what that means for those of us who are part of the church of the 21st century. One of the key ideas in Paul's writing is a notion of economic fellowship, or koinonia. This comes up in many places in Paul's writings, but especially in his discussion of the Jerusalem collection, where we get a snapshot of a network of ecclesia taking up a collection, sending funds to one another, particularly in a time of great need, a time of famine. Koinonia becomes a theological term for sharing all sorts of things, sharing of economic resources, sharing of the Eucharist, sharing in Christ's suffering. So it's a theological term for fellowship, but one with significant practical and especially economic implications. I posted about this on social media a few months ago, and the Reverend Lydia Bucklin, who is Canon to the Ordinary of the Diocese of Upper Michigan, wrote me back and said essentially, hey, that sounds a lot like what we're doing here, which really intrigued me. And so I have asked Bishop Rayford Ray and Canon Bucklin of the Diocese of Northern Michigan to join me for a conversation about what economic fellowship looks like in the UP. And so Rayford and Ray, first of all, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation, and I look forward to exploring koinonia in the 21st century.
You bet.
Let's jump right in, and I'm wondering if Rayford, you could describe just a bit about, both of you actually could just describe a little bit about your context and then the ministry model that has taken root in the Diocese of Northern Michigan.
Yeah, we both kind of feed off of each other. So, but yeah, I mean, the context we live here is the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's a very rural area, a small population. I think we may have 200,000 people in that spans the entire Upper Peninsula. So, yeah, and it's our ministry here is just mutual ministry is just a way of being church together. And what I love about it is it's a way of being Christ's agents to the world. It's we're a community. We together are a community of ministers. We're not gathered around a minister in the way that we do church here. So it's fascinating and it's also life-giving. In terms of who and what we are. And, we've gone over we've done this 30 plus years and we've gone deeper and deeper into understanding our baptismal ministry.
Yeah, in the late 80s, early 90s, I mean, there's a real movement going on around the church with Bishop Wes Frensdorf and the Bishop Gordon in Alaska, and these, lots of great folks who were all kind of looking at this Roland Allen's theology around missional church. And so there was a movement building. Tom Ray, who was bishop here in Northern Michigan, was very good friends with John McKnight, who's the founder of Asset-Based Community Development. And so all of these kind of synergies were happening together to say, how can we reimagine church? And Tom really took it a step further for the diocese here and said, let's structure ourselves in this way intentionally. And what that meant financially is that we combined our resources as congregations. And again, we're a small diocese, so it's 24 congregations. Maybe there were 28 official congregations back then. We now have missional communities that our size really hasn't changed over 30 years, which is, I think, another remarkable thing. But in order, back then, over 30 years ago, this one priest per congregation model was no longer sustainable. And so the option would have been, are we just no longer a sustainable diocese, or do we find a different way of being with the resources we do have? And that's what shifted us, I think, into saying maybe there's another way of being where we actually do have enough. If we believe the scriptures that God can set a table in the wilderness, like maybe we do have enough and we have the gifts and wisdom from within. And that's we hedged all our money on that one, and it was a good bet to take.
I just want to mention is that it was the women of this diocese back in the 80s that really provided a foundation also to the work that we're doing. I mean, they were gathering, um, around in a circle already doing collaborative work. And so I always want to emphasize that, because it's really the women here that was an impetus in a lot of the work that Tom and Jim Kelsey did, and that what we're doing today. So
that's great. Thank you. And again, like, I think a key part of this is just that this has been going on since the early 1990s, late 80s, early 1990s. So this is a fairly mature model. It's not we're not piloting here a structure. Right.
That's right.
But let's go into the financial structures.
Okay.
I think one of the key things that jumps out about it is the diocesan assessment. And maybe if you could talk about the diocesan assessment, and then what that primarily goes to in UP.
Well, I can share with you that 21% of monies that come in is for diocesan assessment is 21%. And then what we have for congregational giving in terms of support of our structure, our missioners, is another 41%. And all the monies that come in are sent back out. So there's a sharing of resources. And that's what gives us the energy to do the work that we're doing here. We've been good about also, we have a strong investment that we've done. But we've had people donate to us also. For example, a teacher, Gwen Bagley, back in the 90s, gave us over $2 million because of the work that we're doing.
Wow.
And that was, that's amazing.
Unexpected.
Unexpected. She'd always say, "Oh, Rayford, don't worry." And then all of a sudden here comes this money at her death. $2 million plus. She gave individual congregations, I think, as much as $30,000 to $40,000 each to a number of them here in the diocese also. So that contributed, that energy, that support of the work that we're doing is important in terms of the financial foundation that we have.
Yeah, I think that what's cool about I will say, we have some members who are snowbirds who go south and belong to other dioceses for part of the year. And when they talk to their friends about the formula that we use, they come back and go, "My friends can't believe our diocese taxes us so much." And we say, no, it's not that. And so yes, those numbers sound like outrageous, right? But then we have to remember, okay, for smaller congregations, 80 to 90% is sometimes used to pay for a clergy person. I mean, nowadays, especially, even if you're paying someone, say like 60 is like a minimum for a lot of clergy dioceses. And then health insurance is $37,000 for a family right now. And then you've got pension, and unless you have $100,000 to pay for one clergy person, right? That's not sustainable for so many of our small congregations. And I don't know if you saw the numbers, but just recently they said average Sunday attendance is 21 people in the Episcopal Church right now.
Wow.
From the last procure report, 21 people. So that's, yes, it's a chunk, right? But then that does leave 40% for the life and mission and ministry and the building and the other things, without having to think about care in terms of what we call missioner, but what people would consider a companion, someone to walk alongside, to care for them, to teach, to preach, to do those things that we ask clergy to do. I was going to say too that, what was I going to say?
Well, I was just going to jump in just to clarify on the numbers. I think you said, or it sounds like total, the assess or what's drawn is about 61%. Is that
yes.
total? And 21% goes on to kind of the diocesan operations, but then 40% gets fed back to the congregations, primarily, if I'm correct, in the form of salary for a ministry team leader. Is that
Yes.
accurate? Right.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
And from our prior conversation, I think one of the, again, most striking things about this model is that all the ministry team leaders are paid the same. Is that
yes.
correct?
Mhm.
It's just, I guess, could you say a little bit more about that and why that's such a part of the model?
Well, go ahead, Lydia. I'll just jump in. What it does is when we all can be paid essentially the same amount of money. I mean, my salary is not much different than the missioners here in this diocese. And it just affirms the person and the value of the person that's helping enable ministry to go on in this diocese. I mean, there's a sense of respect out of this. And, I think that's a key. We're all on the same playing field. It's not that hierarchical structure where the bishop makes 130, 200, 250, 300,000. There's no way that's done here in this diocese.
Yeah, and it's I was just going to say the work is the work, right? And that's when we look at like anti-bias work in terms of transitions. I do transition ministry for the diocese, and looking at we know in our system of church that white men, cis hetero, have been paid more, and so when they go into a new call or transition, they ask for more money than maybe women or people of color, and so that whole system is set up to have uneven pay structure. And so what we're saying from the get is, no, this is what this is what's a sustainable income in this area for this particular ministry, and that's what everyone is paid. And so when we negotiate, like COLA increases or any of that, that's for everybody. And so if the system can't sustain that for everybody, then we need to look at the system, not the individuals and what they're worth. I mean, that's such an inhumane way of treating people.
It is.
And as someone who goes to a very small congregation and recently noted that the salary really does take up a really huge portion of the budget, and love obviously the priest, but that's not a comment about that. It's just about proportions of budget,
right?
Again, one thing that's really striking about this model is that in the end, it sounds like it takes up less of a percentage of the total budget of congregations. So it's 40%,
that's right,
yes, goes towards salary. But in many places across the church, much more than 40% of the budget is going toward clergy salary. Is that accurate understanding?
Yes. Yeah, up to 80 to 90%. And what happens when 80 to 90% of a budget goes to one person's salary is things get out of whack in terms of authority, in terms of what you feel like you have to carry on your shoulders. And like, if I'm a priest in a small congregation, I'm going to try to do more, knowing that, well, I'm the one getting paid and I'm taking, the money from these folks who are giving of their hard-earned money. I'm going to be less likely to ask someone to help me with something because I recognize, well, I'm getting paid all the money. And so it's this cycle of like constantly feeling like everything's on the shoulders of that one person, which then that one person becomes more and more important. And then they get more and more burnt out. It's just, there's so much in this idea of shared ministry with being tied to the economics of it. And the piece I'll say too is that 40% of a wealthy congregation is a different number than 40% of a poor congregation, and they receive the same amount of care. So one congregation that maybe is in a town that has had lots of iron ore industry and lots of wealth in the past, historically, may have a larger endowment. And so they may contribute more money if you look at the bottom line, but it's the same amount. It's like the widow's mite, like whatever meager amount any of us have to offer is worth the care and the same amount of support.
And I think what's also important, it's insane, in my opinion, when we go up and we talk about stewardship and we go up to the pulpit and we preach on stewardship in the model that we not that the church has. We're asking people to support the work that the priest is doing. I mean, it's insane, you know. So, and how dehumanizing it is for the person who is asking for money. And what we've done is say, no, the monies are for the ministry that we're doing within the church structure, but also out in our neighborhoods. And that's the work that the missioner does to help the communities move forward.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's like a kind of another iteration of this idea of being gathered around the ministry as opposed to gathered around the minister.
Yeah.
Our financial structures, to a certain extent, are gathered around, are very focused on the minister.
Yes.
And this is a kind of shifting away from that. Can I just pop in here and say, I think this is the most low-key radical thing that's happening in the church. It's actually pretty radical.
It is pretty radical.
And let me tell you,
the fact that people, for the most part, like living this way. I mean, certainly there are folks who go, "Oh, I don't know, you know, it sure would be nice to have that parish priest take care of us." That's not like that disappears in our model, but for the most part, people, and when we have visitors, we welcome people here for visitors weekend, everyone's welcome to come. But what you'll hear from people is we would never go back to having a rector. We would never go back because it abdicates the roles of the laity, the gifts of everybody, that everybody's gifts, it's all of our responsibility. Evangelism is everybody's responsibility. Social justice is everyone's responsibility. It's our ministry and daily life that matters the most, not what happens on Sunday morning. We can make Sunday happen. But let's do the rest of it all together.
Yeah, and we're not about, you know, what I love about the way we do in terms of baptismal ministries, we claim our authority. We don't hand it over to the minister or the priest that's up there on Sunday mornings. We just don't do that. You know, we claim it. And that's part of our understanding of baptismal ministry here in the diocese. And I'd also just I think our model can also threaten the hierarchical structures of the church. You know, I mean, let's face it. You know, you talk to someone who's making 150 to 200,000 and say, no, let's bring it down to something that we're all making together, and you'll see it bubble up. That agitation and that threat will be there.
Absolutely.
And I think we could afford more dioceses if the bishops' salaries were lower. And I don't know that merging into lots of giant dioceses is always the best solution. I think really we love being a small diocese. We have so much impact in our community for our size. We are just fine. We are strong and mighty. We are not small and struggling. And so I think that's, you know, a story that's not often told too, is that smallness isn't a bad thing by nature. Like, smallness is actually beautiful. We live in a place that's small and that's rural and remote. We reflect that. We should all be reflecting the places in which we find ourselves located. And that's not a deficiency.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I also want to mention is that the work that we're about in terms of, because of the financial resources that we have, because of the work that we do, I mean, you know, you can do IndigiAid that brings in, I don't know how much money brought in, but it was done on behalf of the diocese and others, $40,000. What we did during COVID is for Feeding America West. We collected $100,000 to go to feeding people here in the Upper Peninsula. And we are now going to begin in April another move to gather another $100,000. I mean, that's amazing work that we're doing here.
Absolutely. And that's exactly where I wanted to go. It's just sort of the way in which it allows you all to be doing really impactful things in your area, but across the church. I mean, you mentioned IndigiAid. Let's kind of just look at that particularly during the lockdown period, the most severe period of lockdown of the pandemic. I saw that the Diocese of Northern Michigan had created a partnership with Navajo Land to do Indigia-Aid. And it was like this sort of online, almost like telethon sort of like concert, and people were reading poems and raised $40,000. And there were two things that were really striking to me about it. First of all, it sure did remind me of the Jerusalem collection, as discussed in Paul's letter. Secondly, it was built on long-standing partnerships. I mean, this wasn't just a surprise sort of knocking on the door. This was based in long-term relationships and trust. And then thirdly, just the generosity. I think where many parts of the church were kind of seizing up a bit or very scared, I was just really struck by it, by the generosity. And if I'm remembering correctly, I believe the diocese did not experience the same level of drop off during lockdown as others. Is that right?
Yeah, in terms of, yeah, that's true.
We weren't impacted the same. And I mean, some of that was the smallness. I think it's easier to maintain community when you're already a smallish group. But we also had a sense of collaboration as a diocese, so we were used to doing things together, so to pull together to kind of create one worship book for everybody to use like that. We do that kind of stuff too.
And what was remarkable during that time, there was a palpable energy doing Indigia-Aid and other things that we did. The energy rose here, and we fed off of each other. I can tell you, it made a difference in who and what we are.
And a lot of what we've done is, it's with partners. I mean, Sandra Montez and Shaniqua Broken Leg and others, like we don't do anything in isolation, I will say.
That's right.
And with the we did the Feeding America stuff ecumenically, and that what we've been willing to do is just say we can use the tools and resources that we have as a diocesan structure. So we're happy to serve as the fiscal agent for the monies to run through and to do the funding request and to go back out, which then it looks like we're doing more than maybe even, everybody contributed and everybody was part of it. But because we hold that diocesan structure and we've been able to kind of maintain that in a nimble way, we can be a vehicle for the ministry to take risks and to say, yeah, let's try that on. Like our UP Wild, worshiping outside, all of the work we've been doing with Indigenous communities locally in terms of sharing stories of boarding school survivors. Like we've written a lot of grants. And I think you live differently when you're not obsessed with always running out of money. Because you just say, let's just dream big and let's see what's out there. Let's see who wants to work with us. And like, if people say no, that's okay. We can do other stuff. But for the most part, people say yes. Like we get more and more grants and community partners because we're willing to imagine how we might be a piece of something, not to control it or be the whole part of it, but to just say, yeah, that's important to us. That's important to you. Let's work together on it. You just have to do that when you're small and when you're working with other people.
And it's amazing because we have one congregation. In fact, I got a letter today because they're looking at their building, which is a huge building for the amount of people that are there. But what they've done is they started to dream, and it came from bottom up to dream about what they could do with the building. And so now they're talking about ways of doing a food pantry downstairs. Now they're looking at grants because they have to restructure some parts of the building to make that happen, or a labyrinth for their worship space where they can, also gather together. I mean, it's that kind of visioning and energy that is part of who we are. Yeah. And there's a rootedness in there. There's that a spirit that's there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to end with a question, because in many ways, many parts of the Episcopal Church sound or are in a somewhat similar place to where I think the UP was in the late 1980s, kind of looking at its structures, looking at its budgets, and realizing that they have to find a different economic model. So, with all humility, I wonder what you think the rest of the church can learn from what is happening in your diocese?
For me is to share your wealth, not only within the church community, but outside the church walls. It really does open up. It opens up the spirit. It opens up the hospitality. It's life-giving. It changes who we are. And that's why I love being here in Upper Peninsula. It's because of that life-giving spirit that's a part of us.
Yeah, I mean, I think just having faith, we know from our scriptures, we know from our faith that God doesn't leave us hanging. Like, we always have enough. And if we actually believe that we have enough and we live that way, we have enough for what God is calling us to do in our particular context. It may be not what we used to do or what we think we have to do, but if we really look at what we're being called to do, God gives us what we need for that. And especially when we partner with other people. And I think that's that we have to shift from that place of anxiety and feeling and spinning our own hamster wheels. I mean, it's just silly. We need to work more ecumenically. We need to work more missionally. We need to let go of this idea of Episcopal exceptionalism that we got this. If we share what we've got, we have more than enough for sure.
Yeah. And I think that the church, for me, right now, I think the church is in a mode of trying to, in a survival mode, for the institution. So we try to find ways to reconfigure ourselves to make that happen as the church was, let's say, 10 years ago. Well, the church is never going to be that way, and it's just not. And so I hope the model that we do of sharing our resources will enable others to see what can happen in their own lives and also in the neighborhoods where they live and move and have their being. I mean, that's our missional work is our primary work here.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very powerful place, I think, to end. So thank you so much for having this conversation. I think,
thanks, Mikhail.
I think this is going to be really inspiring and hopefully disrupting even a conversation for folks to listen to. So again, thank you.
All right, you take care. Thank you very much.